Welcome back to Movie Patrol. Today I will be introducing a horror and thriller film from 2020 called The Invisibleman. There are spoilers ahead, so watch out and enjoy. It's late at night. Cecilia is leaving the bed quietly so she doesn't wake her husband up. We find out that she put her husband, Adrian, to sleep using a sleeping pill. She packs her stuff and unlocks the security system. The reason she is running away late at night is because of Adrian. Adrian is a genius scientist, but he was a sociopath who was overly protective over Cecilia. She leaves the house and gets scared when she hears a sound. It was Adrian's dog. She takes the electric device off his neck and tries to free him. However, the dog hits the car and sets the alarm off. Cecilia runs and quickly jumps over the fence and manages to get in her sister, Emily's car. However, Adrian is not trying to let her go. Sarah and Emily just manage to escape from Adrian. It's been 2 weeks since that incident and Cecilia is still scarred from Adrian. She is staying at James' place, who is a cop protecting Cecilia from Adrian for the time being. Cecilia is having a hard time going out to check the mail. James encourages her, saying that this is the furthest she has gone out since she ran away from Adrian and that it's the first step. A few days later, she gets a letter from Tom, who is Adrian's brother and is an attorney. He tells her that Adrian passed away and that as his will stated, Cecilia will receive $5 million. Cecilia decides to surprise James and his daughter, Sydney, with a gift. She decides to use that money to help James, who was there for her, by paying for his daughter's college tuition. James says this is too much and tries to stop her, but she insists she pays for her tuition. Everything seemed normal and peaceful, but she starts to experience odd happenings. She starts to think she is not alone. As if someone is standing on the blanket, she can't get the blanket off the ground. She gets shocked and calls James. They think she is still stressed from Adrian and try to calm her down. James tells her Adrian will hunt her if she let him and that she has to let go of that fear since he is already dead. She goes to an interview for a job. Knowing that she has to present her project, she made sure she kept it in her bag. On the day of the interview, when she is asked to present her project, she notices that it's not in her bag. She thinks something is not right. She gets up to leave, but suddenly her vision becomes hazy and she collapses. Cecilia is sent back home from the hospital. When she gets back, Cecilia sees the pill she dropped when she was running away from Adrian. She decides to meet with Tom again to explain all these weird occurrences. She tells Tom about a conversation with Adrian and tells him that he might be alive. She says that he has figured out a way to become invisible. Tom and James have a hard time believing her. Tom shows a picture of Adrian's dead body. Cecilia decides to go see her sister to ask for advice. When Cecilia sees Emily, she realizes something is weird. She was talking about an email Cecilia sent in the morning that she has no idea of. Emily says that she never wanted the money she was going to receive from Adrian. Cecilia is confused, but she tells her that Adrian is probably behind all of this. Emily tells her that she needs help and that she should go see a doctor. She goes back home and checks her email. Cecilia is in despair when she sees the email sent to her sister that she has no idea of. Sydney comes into her room to cheer her up, but out of nowhere, she is hit by something. Sydney thinks Cecilia had hit her and calls James. Cecilia tries to explain that Adrian is here and James doesn't believe her. They think Cecilia has gone crazy and decides to leave the house. She calls Adrian to come out, telling him to hit her instead of hitting a little girl. She grabs a knife and starts laying coffee powder on the ground to locate where Adrian is. She decides to call Adrian's phone and hears the vibration from the ceiling. She goes to the roof to check but can't find anything. She calls the phone again and sees Adrian's phone. She looks through the phone and sees a picture of her sleeping. She also sees a knife and an outline of the building. She immediately feels fear. She sees a message from Adrian's phone. She notices someone's presence and decides to pour the paint and sees Adrian. She grabs the knife from the floor and walks towards the kitchen. She sees that Adrian has washed off the paint. Out of nowhere, Adrian starts to attack Cecilia. She is helpless against Invisibleman. She manages to leave the house and gets in a taxi. She decides to go to Adrian's house to find evidence that he is alive. She tells the taxi driver that she needs to get something and that she will be back in a few minutes. She sees Adrian's dog. She goes to his lab and unlocks the machine. She sees the suit become visible with a touch of a button. She tries to take the suit off, but suddenly she hears the dog barking. She decides to hide in the dressing room. She hears Adrian approaching. The door opens slowly, but Cecilia doesn't make a sound. She waits for the perfect time and leaps out of the room. She manages to get away and gets in the car and starts calling her sister to meet her at a public place. Cecilia tells Emily that she has a strength that she doesn't have and that she needs that strength. She tells her that she went to Adrian's house and saw an invisible suit. Emily doesn't seem to believe her. Suddenly she sees a knife floating next to Cecilia. Before Cecilia could even ask for help, Emily gets killed by Adrian. Everyone thinks Cecilia is the murderer. She gets locked up in a mental facility. James is interviewing Cecilia, and she tells him that she has definite evidence but says she can't tell them yet. She knew Adrian was in the room with them. James doesn't believe her and tells her he shouldn't have left her alone in the house and that he failed her. Later she finds out from her blood test that she is pregnant. Tom visits Cecilia and tells her that the money she is receiving from Adrian will be halted unless she gives birth to the baby. Tom explains to her that no one has ever left Adrian and that he is so obsessed with Cecilia because she kept resisting him. Tom tells her that she can start a new life with Adrian with just one phone call. He tells her she is a murderer right now and that he can change her life. She refuses his offer and throws the paper off the table. While Tom is picking up the paper, Cecilia hides a pen in her sleeve. Tom tells her that he will be back in a few days and hopes to hear her answer then and tells her that we will be watching. That night, when everyone is asleep, she reaches for the pen she hid before. She tries to commit suicide. Suddenly, Adrian comes to stop her, but this was Cecilia's plan to lure Adrian, knowing that Adrian wouldn't let her kill herself. She manages to stab Adrian with the pen, but he hides. The guard comes to check up on Cecilia, but Adrian is behind the guard. When he realizes that he's been exposed, he attacks the guard. Cecilia runs away, but the guards try to stop her. The guards come to stop Cecilia, but get attacked by Adrian. They get annihilated by Adrian one by one. Cecilia tries to help the guard to kill Adrian, but he gets attacked from behind. She grabs a gun from the guard and chases Adrian out of the building. She sees an empty car with an open trunk. Suddenly Adrian appears and chokes Cecilia. He tells her that he is not trying to hurt her, but the people she loves will get hurt the more she tried to resist him. Adrian drives off to kill the person she cares about the most. Cecilia calls James to warn him that Adrian is on his way to Sydney and that he needs to go check on her right now. James manages to get home on time. He sees Sydney on the floor. Suddenly, he gets attacked from behind. James tries to fight back, but he can't do anything against Adrian, who is invisible. Sydney cries for help. Cecilia arrives just on time with a fire extinguisher and manages to shoot Adrian. Adrian struggles, but he eventually collapses. Cecilia takes the mask off, but finds out it was Tom under the suit. Adrian was found locked up in the basement of his house, and everyone is starting to think that Tom was behind everything. Cecilia still thinks that it was Adrian behind all of this. James says he was found tied up in the basement, but she tells him that if he can fake his death, he can fake being kidnapped. James says this is his best chance at finding her freedom. That night, she goes to see Adrian. Cecilia tells him that if he wants to have the baby, he has to admit to everything he has done. Adrian says that Tom was the one behind everything and that he was also controlled by him. Meanwhile, James is listening to their conversation. Cecilia tells him that she needs to use the bathroom. Adrian is waiting for her when suddenly, as if he was moved by something, he cuts himself. Cecilia is in shock when she sees this and calls the ambulance immediately. She seems to be in deep stress, but when she hangs up the phone she immediately becomes calm. James goes to check on her, but she says she is fine and that he killed himself. He checks her bag and sees the suit. Knowing that she killed him, James decides to believe that Adrian killed himself. Thank you for watching the video. Be sure to like and subscribe and turn on the notification button so you don't miss out on any content.